I stared at the eviction notice taped to my apartment door. 72 hours. That's all I had left before they'd put my belongings on the curb. At 63 years old, I was about to become homeless, and the people responsible were sleeping soundly in the house that used to be mine. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and 6 months ago, I had everything. A beautiful home in suburban Toronto, a retirement fund worth $1.2 million, and a family I would have died for. Now I was living in a basement studio in Scarborough, surviving on instant noodles and the kindness of the food bank volunteers who pretended not to recognize me. How does a woman lose everything in 6 months? The answer is simple and devastating: trust. It started so innocently. My husband Robert and I had been married for 38 years. He was a real estate developer, successful and charming, the kind of man who knew everyone at the country club. I'd been a high school librarian, content with my books and my students, never questioning why Robert handled all our finances. Why would I? He was my husband. He loved me. Or so I thought. The first crack in my perfect life appeared on a Tuesday morning in March. I came home early from a dentist appointment and found Robert in his study, door closed, voice low and urgent. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but our old Victorian house carried sound like a cathedral. "The papers are ready," he was saying. "She'll never question it. Eleanor trusts me completely." I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob. No, Stephen can handle his part. He knows what's at stake. Stephen. Our son. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might faint. Once she signs, we'll have full control of everything. The house, the investments, all of it. Then we can proceed with the development deal. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. There had to be an explanation. A surprise, maybe? But the tone of Robert's voice, that calculated coldness, I'd never heard it before. That night at dinner, he was the same attentive husband he'd always been. Poured my wine, asked about my day, laughed at my stories. I watched him across the table and felt like I was seeing a stranger. "Eleanor, I need you to sign some papers," he said casually, pulling out a folder. "Just routine financial stuff. The accountant needs updated signatures for our investment accounts." My hand trembled as I reached for the papers. What exactly am I signing? Just authorization forms. You know how these financial institutions are, always needing new paperwork. He smiled that familiar smile, the one that had melted my heart since I was 25 years old. I looked at the documents. Dense legal language, multiple pages. Can I read through them first? Something flickered across his face. Annoyance? Anger? It was gone so quickly I almost missed it. "Of course, sweetheart, take your time, though they're really quite standard. I've been managing our accounts for decades." That was true. But something in my gut screamed danger. "I think I'd like to show these to a lawyer first," I heard myself say. The room went cold. Robert's smile froze. "A lawyer? Eleanor, that's ridiculous. These are just routine forms. What's gotten into you?" "Nothing's gotten into me. I just want to understand what I'm signing." He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Fine, be paranoid, but don't blame me when the accountant charges us extra fees for the delay." He stormed out, leaving me alone with the papers and a growing sense of dread. The next morning, I took the documents to Jennifer Morrison, a lawyer who'd been in my book club years ago. She read through them, her expression growing darker with each page. "Eleanor," she said finally, "if you sign these, you're giving your husband complete power of attorney over all your assets. He could sell your house, empty your accounts, and you'd have no legal recourse." The room tilted, but he said they were just routine forms. "These are not routine. These are designed to strip you of all financial control." She looked at me with such pity I wanted to cry. "Has your husband given you any reason not to trust him?" I told her about the phone call I'd overheard, about Stephen being involved. Jennifer's face went pale. "Eleanor, you need to protect yourself immediately. Don't sign anything, and we need to check on your current accounts." We spent the next 3 hours making calls. Each one was worse than the last. The joint investment account we'd built over 30 years? Robert had moved it into his name only 3 weeks ago. The retirement fund from my years of teaching? Somehow my signature had appeared on forms transferring it to an account I'd never heard of. Our house, which we'd bought together in 1987, the deed now showed only Robert's name. "How is this possible?" I whispered. "I never signed anything." Jennifer's jaw was tight. "I've seen this before. Forged signatures. It's fraud, but it's going to be hard to prove. The documents look legitimate." I felt like I was drowning. "What about Stephen? My son wouldn't. He couldn't." But even as I said it, I remembered. Stephen worked for a law firm, real estate law. And 3 months ago, he'd asked me to sign some papers, said they were for refinancing the mortgage to get a better rate. I'd signed without reading them because he was my son, and I trusted him with my life. That night, I confronted Robert. He didn't even try to deny it. "You were never supposed to find out this way," he said calmly, like we were discussing what to have for dinner. "But yes, everything is in my name now, and that's how it's going to stay. You stole from me, you and Stephen both." He laughed, actually laughed. "Stole? Eleanor, don't be dramatic. I'm the one who earned that money. You were just a librarian. I built our wealth through my business. You just happened to be married to me. I worked for 35 years. That retirement fund was mine," was being the key word. He poured himself a scotch. "Here's how this is going to work. I've filed for divorce. You're going to get a very modest settlement, just enough to be legal. And you're going to accept it quietly, because if you fight me, Stephen and I have lawyers who will drag you through court for years. We have documentation showing you're mentally unstable, forgetful, possibly developing dementia." I felt like he'd punched me. "That's a lie." "Is it? You forgot to pay the electric bill last month. You left the stove on 3 times in January. We have witnesses who'll testify that you've been acting erratic." I had forgotten those things, but I'd been distracted, stressed. Now I realized he'd been documenting my every mistake, building a case against me. "And Stephen agreed to this?" Robert shrugged. "Stephen is a smart young man. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. When I sell the development properties, he stands to inherit a fortune. What were you going to leave him? Some dusty books?" That's when I knew I'd truly lost everything. Not just my money or my house. I'd lost my son. The divorce was brutal. Robert's lawyer was a shark named Marcus Chen. Every court appearance, Marcus would present new evidence of my supposed mental decline, bills I'd supposedly forgotten to pay, appointments I'd allegedly missed. My own lawyer, paid for with the last of my savings, was overmatched and overwhelmed. The judge, an older man who clearly sympathized with Robert's Concerned Husband Act, awarded me exactly $45,000. From a marriage of 38 years and assets worth over $2 million, Mrs. Whitmore has demonstrated an inability to manage finances responsibly, the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Whitmore's concerns about her mental competency have merit. The settlement is generous given the circumstances. I tried to appeal. My lawyer said it was hopeless. They built an airtight case, Eleanor. I'm sorry. With my settlement, I paid my legal bills and put a deposit on the cheapest apartment I could find. A basement studio in a rough neighborhood where sirens wailed every night and the smell of mold was inescapable. I applied for jobs, but who wants to hire a 63-year-old former librarian with a gap in her resume? The rejection emails piled up in my inbox, each one another nail in my coffin. I saw Stephen once, at a coffee shop. He was with a beautiful young woman, laughing, wearing an expensive watch I'd never seen before. I walked up to his table. "Stephen." He looked up, and for just a moment, I saw my little boy. The child I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, who'd cried in my arms when his first girlfriend broke his heart. Then his face went cold. "Mother, can we talk? Please?" He glanced at the woman, then back at me. "I don't think that's a good idea. Dad's lawyer said I shouldn't have contact with you during the settlement period. The settlement is done. I lost everything. Surely you must feel something about that?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You didn't lose everything. You got a settlement. Dad was generous." "Generous?" My voice cracked. "Stephen, he took everything I worked for, everything we built together, and you helped him do it." I don't know what you're talking about, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. The papers you had me sign, the refinancing papers, those were fake, weren't they? His jaw tightened. I'm a lawyer, Mother. I would never do anything illegal. But you'd help your father rob your own mother? He stood up, threw some bills on the table. I think you should go. You're making a scene, and frankly, you're embarrassing yourself. Maybe Dad was right about you needing help. I watched him walk away, his arm around that woman who got to see him smile while I stood there with tears streaming down my face. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I learned what true poverty felt like, choosing between heating and eating, washing my clothes in the bathtub because the laundromat was too expensive, lying awake at night listening to my stomach growl. I thought about ending it, standing on the subway platform, watching the trains rush by, wondering how much it would hurt and whether anyone would even notice I was gone. But something kept me going. Anger, maybe, or stubbornness. The same quality that had made me a good librarian, never giving up on a reference question, always finding the answer no matter how long it took. I started going to the Toronto Reference Library. It was warm, it was free, and nobody bothered you if you sat there all day. I'd pretend to read, but really I was just existing, trying to remember what it felt like to be human. One afternoon in September, I was in the genealogy section. I don't know what drew me there. Maybe some subconscious hope that my family history held something better than my present reality. I requested my parents' documents from the archives. My mother had died when I was 20, my father when I was 32. I'd been so young, so busy with my own life, that I'd never really gone through all their papers properly. Robert had helped me box everything up and put it in storage, said we'd deal with it later. Later never came. And when Robert cleaned out our house, he must have dumped those boxes because I certainly didn't have them now. But the library had copies of some documents: birth certificates, marriage licenses, immigration papers. My grandparents had come from Scotland in 1949, settled in Nova Scotia, eventually made their way to Ontario. I was about to close the file when I saw it. A paper clipped to the back, almost overlooked. A letter dated the 15th of November 1953 from Royal Bank of Canada to my grandmother, Agnes Whitmore. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, this letter confirms the establishment of trust account #7742-A in the name of your granddaughters, as per your instructions. The account will remain sealed until the beneficiaries reach the age of 65, at which point the full amount plus accumulated interest will be transferred to them. Current deposit, $2,847. My hands started shaking. I had a grandmother I'd barely known. She died when I was 3 years old, and she'd set up a trust account for me? I did the math. I'd turned 63 in April. In just over 2 years, I'd be 65. But could it be real? And after 71 years, would there be anything left? I photocopied the letter with trembling hands. The next morning, I was at the Royal Bank's main branch on Bay Street the moment it opened. The young woman at reception looked at my worn coat and shabby purse with barely concealed disdain. Can I help you? I slid the letter across the counter. I need to inquire about this account. She glanced at it dismissively. Ma'am, this is from 1953. The account number format isn't even used anymore. I'm sure it's been closed. Could you please check? She sighed dramatically but typed something into her computer. Then her expression changed. She looked at the screen, then at the letter, then at me. I need to get my manager. 5 minutes later, I was sitting in a private office. The manager, a man named David Fraser, studied the letter and my identification with an intensity that made my heart race. Mrs. Whitmore, he said finally, I need to ask you some questions to verify your identity. What was your grandmother's full maiden name? Agnes Margaret Campbell. And your mother's name? Catherine Agnes Whitmore, born the 2nd of March, 1932. He nodded slowly, making notes. Then he turned his computer screen toward me. Account #7742-A Trust, Agnes M. Whitmore, established 1,953 primary beneficiary. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. Granddaughter. Secondary beneficiary, Margaret Ann Whitmore. Access date, upon 65th birthday of beneficiary current value. 834,7294美元, 67美分. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the desk, certain I was hallucinating. That can't be right, I whispered. David Fraser's expression was almost reverent. Mrs. Whitmore, your grandmother made a very modest initial deposit, but she chose extremely conservative, long-term investments. Over 71 years, with compound interest and careful management, that $2,847 has grown considerably. This is one of the oldest active trust accounts in our system. $8 million. I couldn't process it, but I can't access it until I'm 65? That's correct. However, he consulted his computer again. There is a provision. In cases of extreme hardship, the trustee can authorize an emergency disbursement of up to 10%. Given your current circumstances, I believe we can make that happen. I started crying. Not delicate tears, but huge, gasping sobs that shook my whole body. This kind man handed me tissues and waited patiently until I could speak again. I've been living in a basement apartment, eating food bank donations. I have $127 in my bank account. My husband and son stole everything from me. I'm very sorry for what you've been through. He stood up. Let me make some calls. We'll get you access to that emergency fund today. And Mrs. Whitmore, you might want to consider hiring a lawyer, a good one. That afternoon, I walked out of Royal Bank with a bank draft for $834,000, 10% of my trust fund. More money than I'd ever imagined having. I went directly to Jennifer Morrison's office. She listened to my story, her eyes growing wider with each detail. Eleanor, with this kind of money, we can go after Robert and Stephen. The fraud charges, the forged signatures, all of it. I want more than that. My voice was steady now, strong in a way it hadn't been in months. I want them to know what they did to me. I want everyone to know. She smiled. Then let's give them a war they'll never forget. The first thing I did was hire a forensic accountant. Within 2 weeks, he'd uncovered the trail of fraud. My signatures on the transfer documents were forged, clearly enough that even a cursory examination should have caught them. The refinancing papers Stephen had me sign were actually deeds transferring property ownership. We filed criminal charges: fraud, forgery, elder abuse, theft over $5,000. Both Robert and Stephen were arrested at their offices, led out in handcuffs in front of their colleagues and clients. The media loved it. Local developer and son charged in million-dollar fraud scheme against wife and mother. The Toronto Star headline screamed. Robert's face was plastered across every news site in Canada. His real estate empire crumbled within days. No one wanted to do business with a man who'd rob his own wife. His partners abandoned him. His pending development deals collapsed. Marcus Chen, Robert's shark lawyer, suddenly had no interest in defending him. Robert had to settle for a legal aid attorney who was fresh out of law school. Stephen lost his position at the law firm. The Law Society of Ontario launched an ethics investigation. His girlfriend left him when his trust fund prospects disappeared. The civil case was even better. Jennifer didn't just sue for the stolen money. She sued for emotional distress, for fraud, for elder abuse. And because Robert had been so confident in his victory, he'd spent lavishly. The proceeds from selling our properties, the liquidated investments, all of it was gone, blown on a penthouse condo, a new sports car, expensive vacations. He had nothing left to pay the judgment. The criminal trial happened in February. I sat in the courtroom and watched Robert try to explain away the evidence, the forged signatures, the fraudulent documents, the recorded conversations his own lawyer had kept as insurance. She was losing her memory, he insisted on the stand. I was protecting our assets. The prosecutor presented evidence that I'd been working full-time until 3 weeks before Robert started his scheme. Medical records showing I was in perfect mental health. Testimony from colleagues that I'd been sharp, organized, completely competent. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, guilty on all counts. Stephen's trial followed 2 weeks later, guilty. Robert got 6 years in federal prison, Stephen got 4. I sat in that courtroom and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even relief. Just a profound emptiness where my family used to be. After the trial, Stephen asked to speak to me. The guard brought him to a consultation room, his hands cuffed, his expensive suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I need you to know." I looked at him, this stranger who used to be my son. "Why did you do it?" "Dad said you wouldn't suffer, that you'd get enough to live on." He made it sound like we were protecting the business, protecting my inheritance. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was in too deep. Tears ran down his face. I was weak and greedy, and I destroyed the one person who always loved me unconditionally. "Yes," I said simply. "You did. Is there any chance you could ever forgive me?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "Maybe," I said finally. "In time, when you've served your sentence and rebuilt your life and proven that you've learned from this, maybe then we can talk about forgiveness. But Stephen, the mother you knew, the one who would excuse anything you did because you were her baby, she died the day you betrayed me. If we ever have a relationship again, it will be between two adults who have to earn each other's respect." He nodded, crying harder. "That's more than I deserve." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." I moved out of that terrible basement apartment, found a beautiful 2-bedroom condo overlooking Lake Ontario. Nothing ostentatious, but comfortable and safe and mine. On my 65th birthday, the full trust fund became available. $8 million. My grandmother, whom I'd barely known, had given me a gift that spanned 71 years and saved my life. I learned that she'd been a Scottish immigrant who'd worked as a seamstress. She'd saved every penny she could, invested carefully, and set up that trust because she'd grown up poor and was determined that her granddaughters would have security. I wished I could thank her. Instead, I went to her grave in Mount Pleasant Cemetery and sat on the grass beside her headstone. "You saved me, Grandma," I whispered. "You saved me from them and from giving up and from losing myself completely. I promise I'll honor this gift. I'll never take it for granted." With part of the money, I set up a foundation for women escaping financial abuse because I learned that what happened to me happens every day. Husbands who control the finances, who gaslight their wives about money, who slowly strip them of financial independence. And when these women finally escape, they have nothing. My foundation provides legal aid, financial counseling, and emergency grants. In the first year, we helped 213 women. Each one of them reminds me why I survived. I also volunteer at the library again, not as staff, but as a literacy tutor, teaching adults to read, helping them access the world that opens up through books. Sometimes I see older women there looking lost and scared, and I recognize the expression, the hollow eyes of someone who's lost everything. I always approach them, offer a kind word, sometimes just sit with them in the quiet. "It gets better," I tell them. I know you don't believe me now, but it does. Some of them look at me like I'm crazy. Others cry and tell me their stories. And a few, a precious few, ask for help. I always give them Jennifer Morrison's card. And I always offer to pay their legal fees. Robert writes to me sometimes from prison. Long letters full of apologies and excuses and pleas for forgiveness. I don't read them anymore. Jennifer screens my mail and shreds anything from him. Stephen writes too. His letters are different. Shorter, more honest, more painful. He's taking therapy. He's taking accountability courses. He wants to be a better person. I don't know if we'll ever truly reconcile. But I read his letters. That's something. What I learned from this nightmare is that trust is precious and fragile and should never be given blindly, even to those we love most. That financial literacy isn't optional, it's survival. That you should always, always read what you sign. I learned that the people who seem to love you most can be the ones who destroy you. That blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. That sometimes the family you thought you had was just an illusion, and you have to build a new one from scratch. But I also learned that strength can come from the most unexpected places. that a grandmother you barely knew can reach across 71 years to save your life, that there are good people in the world who will help you when you've lost everything. I learned that you can survive what you thought would kill you, that even at 63, facing homelessness and poverty and complete betrayal, you can find a way forward. And I learned that revenge, real revenge, isn't about punishment. It's about refusing to let the people who hurt you define your story. It's about taking back your power and using it to help others. It's about building something beautiful from the ashes of your destroyed life. Today, I'm 66 years old. I live in a home I own, pursue work I love, and help women who are where I used to be. I have friends, real friends, who chose me not because of obligation, but because they genuinely care. Robert and Stephen took my money, my home, and my innocence, but they couldn't take my strength, my intelligence, or my will to survive. And in the end, a Scottish seamstress who died 63 years ago proved stronger than both of them combined. My grandmother, Agnes, left me more than money. She left me proof that love can transcend time, that planning for those who come after us matters, and that sometimes the most powerful act of love is giving someone the tools to save themselves. I only wish I could have known her. I think we would have understood each other. To anyone reading this who's facing financial abuse, who's being controlled or manipulated or stripped of their independence, document everything. Trust your instincts. Don't sign what you don't understand. Get a lawyer. Open your own bank account. Build an escape plan. And know that even when it feels hopeless, even when the people you trusted most have betrayed you, survival is possible. Strength is possible. Freedom is possible. You are not alone. You are stronger than you know. And somewhere, maybe in a dusty archive or a forgotten safety deposit box or a trust account that's been waiting for decades, there might be help you don't even know exists yet. Never give up.